Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back. This is our 21st episode of this program. And if you've missed any of the prior programs going back to July 2nd, 2024, make sure you go back and listen to all of the programs. And a lot of information. Tonight's program, I'll be mixing some very interesting topics. Now, in the world of science, and of course I grew up in the world of science, I had a double major, physics and mathematics as an undergrad, nuclear solid state physics in graduate school. And if you can't put a meter on it, you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. And that's kind of the rule in science. And of course that makes sense. You can't theorize or hypothesize things, but people do it all the time, such as the Oort cloud, something that can never be examined or studied or seen or measured, but it's assumed that it's there, this hypothesized cloud of comets that supposedly surrounds our solar system, that is so far away and so sparse that you could never send a spaceship there, certainly not with our technology. So it happens all the time. But when it comes to things like the human body and the human psyche, for example, what's the thought process? What's the creativity process? What is the process that creates feelings? What is the process that creates empathy or lack of empathy? These are things that science cannot really define, because you can't put a meter on it and measure it. You can't come up to a person and put a probe in one ear and in the other ear and determine if they're psychologically stable or not. I mean, there's all, so psychology, for example, is one of those fields that's really, it's open to interpretation, let's just put it that way. So you have the different schools of psychology in which study personalities and disorders, human disorders, psychological disorders. But what does it all come back to? It comes back to the fact that our body, our nervous system, our brain, etc., are not just simple computers. If it were, we would all act the same. And that's the way the animals are. Animals are very predictable in their behavior. And if you, for example, the Pavlov's dog example, where the Pavlov would ring a bell and then feed the dogs. And then they would salivate because they were hungry, they were anticipating food. And so, of course, one time he rings the bell and he doesn't give them any food, but the dogs are there salivating. So it's a physical response to a stimulus. And of course, that's the way animals operate, and the human being is part animal, but there's something different about human beings. So tonight's show, I want to cross that line and go into that area. And interestingly enough, this happens all the time where scientists hypothesize, the electric, there's something electric, and you can put electric devices on the human head or implant them in the human brain, which is being done now more and more, where they're looking at AI, and of course the first application, of course, is with medical. They're going to help the world and solve the world's problems with mental disorders or other, for example, people that have nervous system disorders, solve them by implanting electrical devices. etc. And that's the first wave always of any kind of research like this. However, it always turns into some mad scientist in the laboratory or people who are in control using it as methods of control. All of a sudden, everybody's got to have a brain implant. Oh, you got to have one. It's going to help you out. It's going to make you all better. And then all of a sudden, they start controlling people through brain implants. The Dr. Strangelove comes in with some divisive way of using these technologies to control human beings So anyway, but tonight I want to cross that barrier between science, and it's something that I've actually worked in. I'll give you an example here. In the mid-1990s, I had the opportunity to work with some atmospheric scientists at the University of Novosibirsk in Russia. And in spite of the Cold War was actually waning at that point, but there still was not what you would call great cooperation between the United States and Russia. But at any rate, they got wind of my work and were translating it, and we had daily study sessions where they would examine and try and understand what my physics was. And eventually it was propagated throughout the education system in Russia. And I know this because it came back to me in many different ways. For example, I'll give you an example. I was at an American Geophysical Union meeting. I was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And they always have these events, these excursions, they call them, where you go out, and this one happened to be on a boat, a pretty big boat, like a tourist boat, like a mini cruise liner, you might call it. And the was a supper session, and we were going to go up the canals of the around Fort Lauderdale, the Intercoastal Canal. And so I went to the event and saw the usual suspects, the NASA scientists and all the other people. A lot of people go to these and bring their spouses, etc. I was there by myself, as I typically was. And so after a while, I went up there was a second deck in a bow of the ship. I went up there and there was nobody there. So I'm standing there looking out over the very expensive houses going up the coastal canal. And this young lady comes out and leans on the counter next to me, or the railing, and starts talking to me. She has a very thick Russian accent, but spoke English. And my Russian is not exactly good. In fact, it's pretty close to zero. But anyway, we were talking, and she had just gotten her PhD in solar magnetic fields. That was her specialty. And so I was talking to her, and I said, well, that's something I work in also. That's the reason I was at that American Geophysical Union meeting, was to give a talk on exactly that topic. And so we were talking, and finally I said, well, my name is James McCanney. And she goes, yeah, I know. I studied your work as a little girl. And so, I mean, that was the level of, that meeting, of course, was decades later after my work with the Russian scientists. So I know my work was filtered into the education system in Russia. Work dealing with the electromagnetic nature of the solar system, etc. And the reason I'm talking about this is because as those daily meetings went on with the atmospheric scientists, the news of this got over to the psychology department at the same university. And so what happened is they had been studying the reactions of unborn fetuses. In other words, these were babies that were in the mommy's womb, and they were doing all kinds of tests with electrical signaling, etc. And what they realized is there was a great deal of activity when the baby was born. And they couldn't figure it out, but it was related to the positions of the planets. And they had already come to this decision. But they didn't realize what do the planets have to do with the baby being born, etc. And this is getting into the realm of psychology and the human condition. And so anyway, what we discovered, and due to my work, was that the planets are all discharging the solar capacitor. They are electrically charged negatively, and they also interact with Earth. And so their electrical discharges, they're like antennas. Then we typically think of the planets as these solid bodies working under Newton's laws of gravity, etc. But there's a whole electrical component to them. For example, every time Venus comes around the sun and we come up behind Venus, Venus aligns with the sun. It's called an inferior conjunction. Venus aligns between Earth and the sun. We get this dose of biological material that causes flu. It's the flu virus, and this is in the medical journals. This is not just me talking, this is in the medical journals where the inferior conjunction of Venus is related to outbreaks of flu. And this goes all the way back to the Chinese, who first started to realize this in around 1200 AD. So the planets have electrical conditions, and what's this issue with the flu? Well, it turns out that Venus is still acting as a comet. It has a large tail, and when the Deep Impact spacecraft went by a comet, they had this sponge-like material that was in a probe, and as it went through the comet tail, it picked up all of this material that was in the comet tail, and lo and behold, when they came back, there was biological structures, very primitive, but biological structures in the tail of the comet. So that's where the flu comes from when Earth passes through the tail of Venus, and my work explains this. Standard science, there's no explanation at all. They think comets are dirty snowballs, that Venus is just that planet over there that formed 4.5 billion years ago and never had anything happen to it since, nor Earth. Okay, so anyway, this is somewhat of an introduction. And before I get going on this, I want to apologize for last week. And I was talking about the European Space Agency mission to Comet 67P, and I said that it was the New Horizons spacecraft. And no, New Horizon was a spacecraft that went to Pluto. And it was actually the Rosetta mission with the Philae lander. The lander was what landed on the surface of Comet 67P, conclusively proving that comets are not dirty snowballs and that there's something radically different. What they discovered were organic compounds, mainly like grains like sand grains, but of organic compounds. And so anyway, it was not the New Horizon mission. So this is the kind of thing which I find comical, that and there are professional astronomers, people who don't like me very much because I'm too honest about the situation in science. They would take that and, oh, McCanny said this, that he made a mistake. He called it the New Horizon spacecraft, and it was really the Rosetta. When they are remiss at admitting to their own blatant grand scale mistakes of calling comets dirty snowballs. So I always find that humorous to find the naysayers that don't have a habit of looking in a mirror. But anyway, yeah, I said New Horizon spacecraft. It was correct me. It was the Rosetta spacecraft that went to Comet 67P from the European Space Agency. Okay, so by the way, I'll be in future weeks here. I'll be talking about some very interesting topics related to outer space. I want to concentrate on outer space because it's so important in the future of mankind. Okay, so your brain is a transmitter. It's not only a transmitter, but it's like a computer-like device. It has the synapse connections. It has the ability to put information together. And when artificial intelligence tries to duplicate the functions of the brain, what they're assuming, and it's a false assumption, what they're assuming is that the human brain is simply a computer. Like you put enough transistors together, you put enough resistors together, you put enough synapse connections together that can be simulated by an electronic circuit, and you have the duplication of a human being. Because it operates the muscles, the heart, every cell in your body somehow is connected back to this overall nervous system. So in all kinds of other functions, the pituitary gland, all of these enzymes that move through your body, etc. So your body is a pretty complicated device, let's put it that way. However, there's a lot more to it than what meets the eye. So if that's your opinion of the human condition, let's just call it that, then you're really missing the biggest part of it. Because the other part of the human situation is that there's communication. Let's go off the rails here a little bit. Let's talk about people who practice yoga, where they sit in a position and they have breathing exercises, and that breathing is necessary because we lack the oxygen in this atmosphere we're in right now to produce the level of consciousness that the human being should be have available readily on a daily basis, but we don't. And so yogas have developed techniques of concentration, of alignment of the body, of the nervous system, etc. And they also talk about things like chakras. And for example, I was in a class one time. I went a number of years, and I had, because I had been a scientist, this was for my 50th anniversary, which was many decades ago, by the way. And I gave myself a present, and it was to take this 2-year course on health. And it was extensive. It was like the equivalent of, say, becoming a nurse, just to give you an idea. And so the whole point was I wanted to learn about health because I didn't know anything about health. And so I had an instructor who was from India, and in the anatomy class. And so that was very interesting to understand the physics part of the human body. But there again, as if you study medicine or biology or anything like that, it's concentrating on the physical body, like that's all there is. But the yogas have developed these techniques of extending their chakras. They're developing these radiative fields that are in the body, and it turns out that a trained eye can see them. And the reason I mentioned this course that I took is because as one of the exercises in a course, we went with the class into a dark room. And it was dark. It was nighttime outside anyway. And went into an area where they could close all the doors and really shut off all the light, where it was really, really dark. I mean, complete darkness, like down in a cave type of darkness where there's just no light at all. And so they said, close your eyes, and we all stood there. We're all a group, maybe 10 people, standing there. And so after a period of time of just closing our eyes to the point where they were, because, for example, if you look at a bright light and then close your eyes, you see that image is still in your eyes, and it's transmitted to your brain, etc. So the idea was to get all of the light in any reaction in your eyes to zero, absolute ground zero. And so after doing that, they said, okay, open your eyes now, and what you could see were the auras of the other people. And you might think, oh, well, I'm the only one seeing this. But everybody there, they said, okay, now describe the aura of that person. And we could all see the same thing, and the auras were very different. Every person had an aura that was very different. Some had extensive through their stomach, some had very little there, some had other types of auras. Excuse me. So you could see the human auras. Now, what is a human aura? Anyway, these are the things that science never touches. Is an AI replica of the human being, where they make a robot that can have facial expressions like a human being. They talk about sentience and the ability to be human-like. And my statement is that no, we're a long ways away. But the real situation is there's a extension of the human body, of the human being, that is, you cannot put a meter on. At least we haven't invented meters that can do that. Like I said, you can put like these little helmets or little apparatus on the head, measure brain waves. You can do all of these things. You can take an MRI of the brain. You can take other readings of the nervous system, etc. You can do things like the old experiment where there's all kinds of experiments where like with acupuncture, you put a needle in here and it has a reaction somewhere else in the body, and these are related. So there's a certain level of knowledge, but even with the people who are savvy to this, the yogas and the other people that have developed their ability to all of these different things, I won't go into detail. There's really no way that we have discovered to measure this. For example, if you went into that dark room with a camera and took a picture of these people, you would not see the aura. Your eye is able to see it, but cameras are not. So what is it? What are you actually seeing? What are your eyes picking up? What is it? Is it the infrared? Is it microwaves? Is it very low visible light? Is it visible light? I mean, what exactly is it? Science cannot tell you. And so in the scientific realm, they pretend that it is not there. Now, as the Russian psychologists understood, the human being, and this is interesting too, is because they literally discovered why it is important the moment of birth. And astrologers have used it. Astrology is an empirical science. An empirical science is where you mix component A with component B and you get product C. And so that's an empirical science, and then chemistry might try to refine that in that they give reasons for why this happens, but and like potential wells or energy potential wells, etc., or rates of reaction, different terms like that you have in chemistry. But ultimately they don't understand, and they certainly don't understand why a carbon atom in an inorganic material like a diamond, take that carbon atom and put them in the human body, and it acts differently. Whoa, where does that come from? And so science defines it as organic and inorganic, organic being related to things having life, plants, animals, human beings, etc. And so those are general categories, but they can't tell you why a carbon atom in that diamond acts differently than a carbon atom in a human body. It's the same atom, right? So at any rate, I'm going to discuss this entire topic a little bit more. Let's start with the human nervous system and the synapse. the synapse connections, and these are literally electrical connections, and they know how they work. There's a biological function that creates the energy, but basically it's an electrical connection. It's like a short circuit. And what happens with a short circuit? Well, in electronics, we call that a Schmitt trigger. A Schmitt trigger is a DC voltage source, and you connect wires together in a short circuit, and you can have more complicated circuitry attached to this. There might be an inductor, a coil, a wound coil. There might be more complicated circuitry involved in this, in a Schmitt trigger. But basically, it's what happens is you have a DC source, you have a potential, which means electronic energy is stored. There's electrons and ions separated, and when they are connected electronically, there's a very sharp rise in the conduction of the electricity. And say you have an inductor. Well, when the points first touch, there's zero resistance in the inductor because there's no current flowing. The resistance, the impedance, it's called in electricity, forms because as the electricity goes through this coiled wire, there's a self-induced magnetic field that puts a back pressure, so to speak, on the electric current and slows it down. And so that is the basis of an inductor. It's called in electricity, in electromagnetism, or in circuitry. And so the same thing happens in the human body. But a guy named Nikola Tesla took this concept and put it into a transformer. Now, this is what a Tesla coil is all about. You take a rhythmic coil, and there's a resonance frequency related with this. It's an RC L circuit, and there's a resonant frequency. And so what happens if you pulse that, if you close a Schmitt trigger on the frequency, the resonant frequency of that circuit, what happens is this builds up and builds up and builds up. It's kind of like in music, you have a, high E that will shatter crystal. So some singer sings a high E note, and I think it's high E, whatever it is. It's a note that is the resonant frequency of the crystal glass, and the energy builds up in the glass to the point where it shatters. And so the same thing happens in electricity. And so you can control this by modifying the amplitude of the input signal. And Tesla used this successfully to drill through the Earth's atmosphere, the dielectric of the Earth's atmosphere, and discharge the vertical electric field. And then once the energy started flowing down, he was going to distribute it through the ground as a form of gaining energy from the vertical electric field, which is a capacitor. It's between the ionosphere up above us and the ground of Earth. And so anyway, translate this into the human nervous system, where you have the same thing going on. The synapse connections going on and connecting and causing that instantaneous burst of current, and then this transmits through the nervous system. So it's a series of transmissions, and millions of these put together, for example, give you vision. They go from your eye, they go into the brain, and with time you can understand and interpret this vision. And for example, as it said, that the actual pattern that comes into your brain is upside down from what you're seeing. But your brain rectifies this and turns the signal right side up for you to see and walk around the room without bumping into walls. So, okay, so back to the body, the human body, and people's attempts to duplicate the human body with artificial intelligence. What they are missing is this other component that we cannot put a meter on. We cannot put a meter on the the spiritual side of the human being. And I know this for a fact because I personally have spent time getting away from all of the diversions that we have in human life. And you do this by going out into the wilderness, and you do this for an extended period of time. You find that people in the Bible or in old texts went into the wilderness and spent, typically they say 40 days and 40 nights. But 40 days and 40 nights is a figurative number in the Old Testament or in the old days. 40 was considered a number like today we say billion. Carl Sagan became famous for billions and billions, indicating a number so big that you really can't imagine it. But back in the old days, 40 was that number. And so the idea is that it's such a long time, 40 days and 40 nights, or 40 days in the desert or whatever, that you just can't remember how long you've been out there. And I've done that personally. And this is where you start to connect into the vertical electric field, which is like an amplifier. An electric circuit has, if you put a power source on an electric circuit, it starts to work differently than if you do not have a power source. And so, and the way you do that is you just are outside. And I've talked about this before because if you gather in groups outside and get away from all of the distractions, no cell phones, nobody over there taking selfies, whatever, you get rid of all those distractions and spend a certain amount of time, then the group connection starts to occur. And that is something that, for example, the shamans of Peru or the shamans that go up to the Hindu Kush in areas like that where they go to pray, they call it prayer. But what they're really doing is going up to a higher elevation where they have closer contact. Their feet are on the ground. And by the way, they do it barefoot. And so you see these people. And when I first saw this, I was like, oh my goodness, these people are walking around with no shoes on. But they had a callus on the bottom of their foot that was the equivalent of the sole on your shoe. And they had no feeling for cold because it was freezing, literally. And these people are walking around with no shoes, but they're connected electrically into the ground. And so anyway, that's something that people, more primitive peoples, are very much more connected to all of this than modern people. It would be weeks and weeks, say a young person or an older person that is locked into their telephone, would take them weeks and weeks without that phone in their hand just to get down to normalcy, to where they could actually begin to experience their own physical body and connect to their spirit, etc. It would take them months. And so, in fact, like I said, I did this. And the other thing that helped me do was to for example, I attribute my solution of the prime number problem, organizing the prime numbers, which is extensive work that I have. That's something I don't do in public because it's rather complicated. And so it's only through private contacts in the math world, for example. But my ability to resolve that 2,500-year-old math problem was because I was connected into this. I don't even know what to call it. It's like a cosmic universe, in a sense, and of consciousness. And people, like I say, who are yogas, etc. And so I want to get back to astrology. Now, people in science poo-poo yoga, astrology, and spirituality, and they consider, the majority of, say, physicists, which I've been around all my life, are atheists. And what do they believe? Well, the human body is just this body, and it all happened by random, it came from a random explosion, a Big Bang, and 13.5 billion years later, you're driving your SUV up and down the road. What could be wrong with that? But they don't recognize or acknowledge at all this other part of the human being. And of course, when the human being dies, when the physical part dies, the spirit leaves. And so your communication, for example, with the people who have gone to the other side, as it is called, is a spiritual connection. And they are all there. They're all very interested in you because you are, they're connected with their offspring. And the entire ability of this communal consciousness is connected to human beings. But if you deny it, well, sorry, buddy, but you're not part of it. You're not going to be part of it. You're going to have to break down your thought process completely and reverse it. And for most scientists with a PhD, ain't going to ever happen. Just ain't going to happen. Excuse my bad English, but that's the best I can say about it. And so I saw an interview with one scientist. He was a physicist. And the interviewer was saying, well, what about is there an afterlife? And the scientist said, no. And they said, well, what happens after you die? He said, well, just the body goes away, that's it. That's the end, nothing more. Nothing more. So at any rate, these are all parts of your ability to develop. And you have a very limited amount of time on this planet. So if you are, most people are caught up with this world, this physical world that we live in, making money, gaining power, gaining position, getting an education, getting an A on this course, taking selfies, going on trips, going on vacations, having a nice house, nice car, having good credit rating. What is the jobless rate? Is this going to affect me? How about the stock market? Do you have your investments up to date? I could go on and on and on. But these are the distractions that are put in place for the human beings today, where people are just, the evening news. That's what the evening news is designed to do. It's not designed to give you the news. I won't go into down that rabbit hole. But it's designed to keep you totally distracted from the things you should be thinking about. And that includes the fact that your birthright is to the stars. In a future week, I'll be talking about space treaties. And one of the very interesting things about space treaties between nations, the United Nations, etc., is that it is between these nations, and it has nothing to do with you as an individual and your birthright to go into the stars. It's about all these nations have rights and responsibilities and all the things they have to do and all the things they can't do, etc. But the one thing it doesn't talk about at all is the individual and your birthright to the stars. In fact, what it actively does is it destroys your birthright to the stars. That's the entire purpose. So at any rate, I could go down a lot of rabbit holes there. Okay, so the concept that the human nervous system is simply a series of electrical connections is missing the boat. Let's just point it that way. It's a very primitive view of the world, and it's completely missing the spirit. I've mentioned this before, that I've been in art competitions. I've actually had artwork that was in high-level art competitions, the kind where you have national artists. For example, in many states you have the duck stamp, which is then printed as a postal stamp. But it's a competition in these artists. And I was not doing duck stamps. I had a whole different type of art. But the artists would paint a duck or a flying duck or a fall scene with ducks in it or migratory waterfowl, and there would be a competition, and they would pick the duck painting that was the most realistic. it had this feather of a particular duck exactly correct. And, you know, meticulous judging over these. But the question is that a duck? No, it's a painting of a duck. It's a good rendition, it's a good duplication of a duck, but it's not a duck. And that's the same way with AI, artificial intelligence. If you create a robot with artificial intelligence, and I've seen this one woman is talking, she goes, oh, I'm you know, AI, and you know, she discusses talking to people in her discussions with people, etc. But is she a person? No, and she'll never be a person, because she lacks the thing that makes a person, and that is all of these attributes that the human beings have, because of the only thing you can call it is the spiritual side of the human being, the auras, the connection to outside intelligence, the group situation where you get in groups of 3 or more people outside and start to concentrate on particular topics that are germane to the human condition, etc. The AI misses all of those. If you took 20 robots and you put them outside standing next to each other, they would not experience the human situation. Okay, I want to wrap this topic up because I have another topic I want to jump into, and that is space travel and the different technologies. It's something I'll be covering. It's such a huge topic, I'll be covering it in numerous shows, upcoming shows. But getting back to this topic of the human body, it is so important because it's something that just, I mean, people get out of school or college or university or grad school, and they have no clue what their body is, or they have no contact with their body, and they think they're, oh, I eat organic, so I'm healthy. That's about the most people are, you know, and more than that, they're clueless. They have no idea. And most of the modern food, if you go into a grocery store, I call it dead food. You go up and down the aisles of a grocery store in these boxes and stuff, it's all processed food. There's no food value in it at all. And so most people are not properly nourished. They're not getting proper oxygen. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that the Earth's atmosphere has changed. This is another process of physics and celestial mechanics. And I talk about this, how the large comets have come through the solar system and drastically altered Earth in general, with tsunamis and earthquakes and volcanoes going off and mass extinctions. Not just some little asteroid hitting Earth, but these don't hit Earth, they come by. One of the effects is to change our atmosphere, and during human involvement, human beings have lived through many of these, going back, now we know, hundreds of thousands of years. My new book called The Real History of Man and Earth, Myth, Magic, and Mayhem, it's available on Amazon. It's my only book that's available on Amazon. All the rest are available on my webpage, jmccsci.com. But the people don't realize the real history of man, that this idea of them developing from little monkeys in Africa, and no, it's just ludicrous. Man in his current form has been on this planet for a very long time. And we have, well, anyway, but getting back to the idea of oxygen, we have insufficient oxygen and atmospheric pressure on this planet to sustain human beings. And it's not due to you driving your SUV up and down the road. It has to do with the fact that there have been physical changes to planet Earth, and human beings lived on planet Earth with a much higher oxygen content and higher atmospheric pressure. And today people are using hyperbaric chambers to duplicate that condition to solve all kinds of maladies, whether they're nervous system, or people have problems with mental disorders, or people who have, say, drowned and they've lived through a drowning, or and they're resuscitated and they come back and they have difficulties, the sooner they get them into a hyperbaric chamber, the higher the probability that they will come back to normal. And there's all kinds of healing processes that they're using it for, because the human body lacks oxygen. When you go to the gym and you exercise and you're working out, most people think, well, that's because I got to get my muscles moving, etc. No, that's totally incorrect. What you're really doing is you're increasing your oxygen intake into your body and increasing the pressure, your blood pressure, which is necessary for proper health. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about your heart as related to this entire topic, that your heart is wired in, and most people who are conscious of these types of things that I'm talking about, are aware that the heart is as much of your nervous system and your communication with other people as your brain. And so, and I've talked about this before, young people they're going about their business, walk around the corner, all of a sudden they're face to face, and it's like the whole world stops, and this random meeting, something that's totally missing from dating on internet apps today. I've talked about this before. But what's happening also, besides just kind of the visual seeing somebody there, is all of these systems in your body are connecting. It's magnetic fields, like magnetic fields, but really not magnetic fields. Your auras are connecting, and so that's how people meet and have this immediate connection. And it has nothing to do with something that AI could do. If two robots came around the corner and met, would they fall in love? No. Come on, people, wake up. Get out of this mold that the human being is this robot automaton that just is a wired circuit and like electronic circuitry. No, it is far more than that. Stop. I'm so disgusted at what I see people promoting or putting in brain implants. The assumption is that the human being, the human nervous system, is simply a computer, and you can treat it as such. No, completely wrong. The human being is linked into a cosmic consciousness. When I was talking about the long periods of times I went out into the wilderness, I've done this in the tropics. I did it one time in Canada for a period of about probably from, say, May. This is after I came back from Cornell. I went on an extended canoe trip in central Canada and eventually just stayed there, these cross-Canadian river systems, and ended up staying there through February, so through the entire winter. And that's where really you develop this ability to be alone in the wilderness. And if you haven't done this, this is why scientists, the vast majority of scientists, they get their PhD, they think they're smart, they solved all the problems in the back of the book, but they will never be great scientists because they have never stepped outside of their little world of, going to work and going to school and studying and learning what's in the textbook and what their advisor teaches them or what the company they're working for. That's why there's no creativity. Why could I come along and completely revamp the wind energy industry with a device that has 24 improvements over 3-blade wind turbines, and you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of engineers working in that energy sector and have no clue that what they're doing is completely bogus? It's because they don't think, they're not connected. They've lost in their book studying, their book learning, they've completely lost their ability to be creative. Okay, talk about the Jupiter winds a little bit. These are the winds when Jupiter and Earth electrical discharges of the solar capacitor align. We get the very high electrical currents from Jupiter, and it causes straight line winds on Earth. When it was first noticed, it was actually back in about the mid-90s. The U.S. military put a satellite up to measure electrical conditions in outer space. And one day it got just hammered with this big electrical discharge that they knew was associated with Jupiter. And so they called me up and they asked me what's going on. And I told them, I said, this is the electrical current. Jupiter and Earth are having these electrical connections, and that is affecting our weather down here on planet Earth. These are the Jupiter winds that I talk about. Okay, so the sleep, for example, is a system that your body has to shut down and go through a rejuvenation. But because you don't have enough oxygen, because you don't have enough atmospheric pressure, the sleep is not completely rejuvenating the human body. And that's what aging is the very slow matriculation, the very slow lack of reproduction of the human body in terms of daily maintenance. That's what aging is all about. If not, you would live as a young person for potentially hundreds of years. There's no reason. We just assume that aging, the old adage, there's two things you have to do: pay taxes and die. That's an old, adage. You hear old people saying that. But the other thing is that aging is assumed to be a natural process that you can't do anything about. That's completely incorrect, and there's a lot of people who would like you to believe that. So, the whole issue is that there's two parts of it. You cannot just take more oxygen and have that effect. You need increased atmospheric pressure also. Those two things, and that's why a hyperbaric chamber is different than just giving somebody an oxygen bottle to breathe extended amounts of oxygen. Although, why do older people a lot of times have oxygen tank? It's because their lungs just are not absorbing the oxygen anymore and extracting it from the air, and so they need an oxygen tank to get increased amount of oxygen. But that is not the whole story. The whole story is that you need probably a doubling or tripling of atmospheric pressure. And also you have to be careful with things like this, because there are incidents where people have been damaged by hyperbaric chambers. So it's not, typically you would say, okay, you need to do this under the supervision of a doctor to make sure that there are not any adverse effects that would occur if you're doing this. But the reality is that if we had twice or more than twice the atmospheric pressure and considerable increase in the level of oxygen in the atmosphere, right now we're at around 20% of our atmosphere at ground level is oxygen. And it's not enough. It should be higher. Also, the CO2 level should be much, much higher. The CO2 level, when the dinosaurs roamed the Earth, was much, much higher. And it created this canopy of growth on Earth. Today, there's not enough fauna growth to support even a single dinosaur, let alone herds and herds of them. So what they had during the dinosaur epoch was increased very high levels of CO2. And it didn't cause greenhouse effect and everybody was going to die. No, it actually flourished. And what is needed today, people are taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and they think it's going to be a great benefit. No, what they're actually doing is they're going to kill the Earth by removing CO2, which is that we should be doubling and tripling the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and not by burning fossil fuels. That would not be a good idea. But the point is that the Earth's atmosphere has changed. At one point in Earth's existence, it had much higher oxygen levels and much higher CO2 levels, and it was a vibrant planet, tremendous amount of growth. Also, we don't have enough fauna and growth on Earth today for the mastodons, the herds of mastodons that were, now you find them flash frozen in the Russian tundra, and they roamed in huge, huge herds before the last ice age. And then when the comet Venus came by, it caused a pole shift, which sent the temperate climate region where the mastodons lived up into what we now call Siberia. That's why you find the mastodons flash frozen standing on all 4 feet. They didn't even have enough time to fall over dead. They were flash frozen with the undigested food in their throats. And people have pointed this out before, and that was because there was a pole shift. Antarctica was also a temperate climate continent. We have maps of this, Phoenician maps, which show the coastline of Antarctica before the ice cap went on there. The ice cap of Antarctica is sliding off because the land that it sits on is warm. It's still warm from when it was a temperate climate continent. The history, the science of the world, of mankind, of the history of the world that is being taught in schools today is so bogus, so incorrect. It's just bizarre. And there are people in tier 1 levels of science that know that everything I'm saying here is true. There are people, groups of people, scientists in Antarctica that are studying the remnants of the civilizations that were there when the pole shift occurred. And believe me, they are finding mastodons, they're finding people, they're finding cities that were completely flash frozen, with the people literally just like the mastodons being flash frozen in a single day. This is how quickly it happened. So back to the idea that the Earth's atmosphere has changed and the human being is really poorly sustained with our current atmosphere and atmospheric pressure. And the entire makeup of the human being, besides being this physical body and nervous system and electrical connections and enzymes and blood platelets and everything else that goes into the human body, that there's something tremendously, a tremendous amount of additional functionality in the human body. Okay, so what is the solution? And this is a lot for young people, besides adults, is what can you do about this? Well, the first thing is get rid of that cell phone. Get that out of your life. You know, have it there to make calls, etc. But don't be glued to your cell phone, number one. Sit in a room, a quiet room, and just concentrate. Mathematics is a very good thing to study because it clears your brains out. Before I would take an exam, I would always add numbers in my head and subtract numbers, multiply numbers, and what it does is it clears your brain out from all that other extraneous activity going on and gets you ready to concentrate for an exam. And that little technique helped me out a lot. But most people live in this world of distractions. So you have to get rid of the distractions, and if you're locked in modern life, then it's going to be, I would say, impossible. And so when I was a student, especially in college, I had a regimen, a daily regimen, a routine, which is also helpful. Go to sleep at the same time, get up at the same time. I would lived on campus, and so therefore I could go to lunch, come back, and after supper, I would go back and I would sleep for half an hour, which kept me up till about 11 at night. Then I would sleep 8 hours, get up at 7 in the morning. That was my routine. And it was very good. And if there was a lot of studying to do, of course, then you had to do some all-nighters, they are called. But I had to, quickly would recover from that. But at any rate, the students today have, I'm sure they study there with their phone right next to them. Terrible, terrible conditions. This is, I have an education package on my webpage, jmccsci.com, which is for parents and students. It's a science supplement program with hundreds of lectures, books, etc. included. And so that's one way to understand a lot of this. Also, I just want to remind you that the water filters are on sale, jmccwaterfilters.com, and you get a 30% discount on the MR5 whole house water filter system using the coupon code MASTER.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.